Hey guys, what's going on? Sam Bosworth here. Today we're going to be talking about how ICE are forcing gay, disabled and mentally ill immigrants into solitary confinement. So let's get into it. Yep, that's right, you heard me correctly. ICE in America are forcing disabled, gay and mentally ill immigrants into solitary confinement. So a couple of days ago, MSNBC broke the news that they had filed a Freedom of Information Act request to discover what was going on at ICE facilities, and they discovered that over a 5-year period, now this is under both Trump and Obama, so this is kind of a bipartisan issue, both Democrats and Republicans obviously guilty of this, but over that 5-year period, 8,400 immigrants were placed into solitary confinement, and over 1/3 of those were mentally ill. The rest were a mix of disabled and gay immigrants. We haven't got exact numbers for how many of each make up the rest of those numbers, but either way, pretty horrifying. What's even worse is that only half of that number was said to have broken any rules. The rest, ICE are claiming and stating, were put into solitary confinement for their own safety. Now that is a head scratcher, because if disabled and gay refugees aren't safe with the general population, if that's what we want to call the rest of the immigrants who are trying to seek refuge in the US, then the facilities obviously aren't put together properly to support disabled immigrants. As far as why gay or mentally ill folks would be put into solitary confinement for their own safety, I can't really wrap my head around that, especially if only half were deemed to have broken any rules. I would understand if there were mentally ill immigrants who were perhaps a danger to themselves, but surely if that was the case, that would be seen to be a rule-breaking situation if they were doing anything against the rules, which I've no doubt are authoritarian and terrible anyway. But I just don't understand why this would be the case. Now, it's worth noting that solitary confinement is supposed to be, according to ICE and their sort of official statements, a last resort for anybody, and only in the case of severe rule-breaking. Now, why on earth, then, are there 8,400, a third of which are mentally ill, people, and only half of which have actually broken any rules, being put into solitary confinement? A statement from the United Nations says that solitary confinement over 15 days is inhumane and degrading treatment, and one of these people, who I believe had a disability from what I read, was placed into a solitary confinement for 390 days. Can you imagine the kind of mental toll that would take on a person to be completely confined, 4 walls, no windows, no treatment, no social interaction, no nothing. 390 days in solitary confinement for being disabled, which is horrific. Now, I've no doubt there are some right-wing folks out there sitting thinking, well, if they did, they shouldn't have come into this country if they didn't want this kind of treatment, you know, they shouldn't have broke the law. And here's the thing, and it's the most important thing to that argument, is that seeking refuge, walking up to the Mexico-US border and seeking refuge is not illegal. It is perfectly legal to walk up to the border and seek refuge. Even worse is that 6 people have committed suicide while in solitary confinement, and as far as I could tell, that is from this block of disabled, mentally ill or gay immigrants that have been placed there. So 6 people have died, have killed themselves because of how harsh these conditions are. There have been other attempts at suicide as well. Again, be sure to check the links down below if you want to read further. Now, not only this, but the whistleblower who came out and said this, and also I meant to say I will link all the articles where I found this information down in the description if you want to read into anything I talk about in this video further, be sure to check them out. The whistleblower says not only has this happened, it is still happening. Even after this report has come out, it is still happening. I honestly can't see it ceasing to happen, especially as it really isn't being talked about that much. That's part of the reason I wanted to make this video. I think a lot of times, I've talked about this in previous videos, when it comes out that disabled people are being treated unfairly, not a lot gets done, because we as disabled activists can talk about it, but unfortunately, until a mainstream person, whether that is a celebrity with disabilities or whether it is a news station or whatever, or a mass of news stations, pick it up and talk about it a lot rather than just a quick mention, 2 minutes, nothing's gonna get done. So I'm hoping that by making this video, you will talk about it with your disabled friends as well and let them know about this horrific stuff that's happening. So that is the information, that is the news portion of this video. I wanted to let you know what was happening. Now, on the internet, obviously it is political or otherwise of any discourse online, there is always a comparison to Hitler and the Nazis, but in this particular situation, I think that is entirely just. I think people forget that with Hitler and with the Nazis, it wasn't Hitler got elected to power day 1, day 2, the Holocaust. There was a build-up of terrible things that happened from day one to the Holocaust, and one of those things in between those two was that thousands, hundreds of thousands of disabled people were killed for being disabled. And I want to talk about how Hitler went about doing that, and how it is eerily close to sort of the things you're seeing happening to disabled people, both who are American citizens and, as of this story, with ICE as well. Now, you'll probably know that Hitler wanted a ethnically clean, country with only white people, blonde, blue eyes. You'll have heard all this before. But you may not know, or maybe you do, that he also didn't want there to be any people with disabilities or deformities. He wanted a eugenically sort of perfect nation where everybody was able-bodied, so they would be fit for the workforce and they'd be fit for the military. And there isn't a whole lot of information about this, but prior to the Holocaust, there was something that happened which is known by the name Action T4, A-K-T-I-O-N, Action T4, which was really, could be looked at as a rehearsal for the Holocaust. So because Hitler believed that disabled folks would ruin the reproductive gene pool, he wanted to, at first he said, just sterilize all disabled people. So back then, if you were disabled by law, when you went to a doctor, you would be sterilized so you could not have children who potentially would then go on to be disabled. This makes absolutely zero sense, because some of the sort of symptoms and reasons that this could happen to you were feeble-mindedness, blindness, deafness, alcoholism, and epilepsy. The majority of those are not hereditary. They would not have passed on through childbirth or whatever anyway. Insane. But just generally, how horrible is that to be sterilized, to not have the choice to have children because you have a disability? And this was in 1933, really not that long ago. That's what really horrifies me about all this happening again now, is that we aren't that far away from when even worse happened, In 1933, sterilization, 400,000 people were sterilized, disabled people in Germany were sterilized because of this. Horrific. And then something which is eerily close today, when Hitler would sort of do a speech, or when he would ever talk about anything, it would take one mention of something like this for his subordinates and underlings to go and write up paperwork, and within a few days, something he mentioned as a throwaway comment would then turn into this program which has been created with all this paperwork. And that was kind of what happened with Action T4. So that was in 1933, and if we fast forward to 1939, Hitler received a letter from a man called Richard Kretschmar, who had had a baby who had been born just a few months earlier with severe and incurable physical and mental disabilities, including missing limbs, blindness, and convulsions. However, the original medical records are lost, and these are second-hand accounts, so we can't guarantee that that is actually what was wrong with the child, but that's what we're going to have to work with. And he wanted to euthanize his child because he claimed it was a monster. He wrote a letter to Hitler. Hitler had his doctor go out and check the child out and decided that the child should be euthanized. And that put the idea and kind of paved the way for Hitler's plan to start killing disabled people as they were born. 3 weeks after that happened, after he received that letter and that child was poorly euthanized, paperwork was filed and sent out to all midwives and doctors that if a child was born with a disability, the doctor would have to fill in a form stating what defects the child had. This was then sent to a panel of 3 doctors who each had a chance to put a black X on the form if they believed the child was disabled and deformed. So once this was decided, after at least two of 3 of the doctors had decided this child was disabled, the babies would be taken from their homes or from the hospital and sent off to be horrifically euthanized. Adults at this time were also, if they were disabled and it was on file, they would be forcibly removed from their homes under the guise of getting medical attention and to be helped. The other people in the household would receive letters from the adults if they were able to write for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden they would hear nothing and they would get a letter saying that their child, I suppose it mostly be a child or relative, had contracted the measles and died, and they had been cremated for the safety of everybody else at the facility. This was obviously a lie. They were being euthanized. I'm not going to go into how they were euthanized because it is disgusting, but if you wish to learn further, everything's in the description as to where I got this information from, but fair warning, it's pretty dark. Just bear that in mind. In the mid-1930s, Hitler actually said that he preferred to kill disabled children and adults, but he thought it would be very hard to convince the nation of that it was okay, so he started sterilization first. He felt that if the war was to occur, then this would be greatly accepted, and of course, when World War II started, that is exactly what happened. So we don't have exact numbers of how many were killed like this in that period of time. It's thought that between 90 and 300,000 people with disabilities and deformities were killed in this way, and over half of those were babies and children. I don't even, how do you justify that? It is truly just horrific and horrible. And it goes back to what I was saying about how the Holocaust didn't just happen. It went from Hitler getting into power, he would do speeches, he would make comments, then they would sterilize the disabled people. Again, disabled people weren't really seen as full members of society back then, and then it went from sterilization to the program where the doctors had to, fill in a form and say if they were disabled, they'd be taken from their homes, they'd be killed. Now, in August of 1941, this kind of got out, people find out about it, a lot of religious groups were obviously against it, and as it got out worldwide, British journalists started to report on it too, because a lot of German journalists couldn't for fear of being killed. Once it got out worldwide, Hitler did stop in August of 1941, but he only stopped for a few months because then, of course, there was the Holocaust and disabled people were killed among just other Jewish people. So he never really stopped. It kept going and going and going. Now, obviously, there is a difference between that and what I originally talked about with the ICE putting people with disabilities into solitary confinement, but I think it is really not that much more of a walk to get to that point. Again, the Holocaust didn't just happen. It wasn't day one, day two. There was a slope leading up to it. And I think people with disabilities are already looked upon as second-class citizens in this world, as it is in 2019. I've said it many times before, I could not afford to be disabled in America. I believe the insurance system in America and the cost of medical treatment in America is a way to keep disabled people from prospering. I think it's undeniable. There is no way Medicaid, Medicare, whatever, Obamacare, I could not afford, even with that, I seriously doubt I could afford to have had the surgery I have had when I was 18. I couldn't walk at all due to deformities, which I had surgery to fix. And, I couldn't afford medication. Certainly I can barely afford medication now, which I have to pay for here in the UK, but it would be 100 times as expensive in the US. I just don't think it's that much of a jump from what's happening at ICE to what happened back in the 1930s, 1940s with Hitler and the Nazis. And I know that is I said that's a comparison people make on the internet all the time, but I don't think this is an unfair comparison. I think it is perfectly justifiable. So I've given you that information to do with what you will. I'm sure you will agree that to place disabled immigrants and gay and mentally ill immigrants into solitary confinement for being gay and for being disabled is obvious discrimination, especially to put them in solitary confinement, which can have an intense effect on your mental health. You have no social life. There you are just trapped in four walls. Again, it is legal to seek refuge in America, so to then treat people like this is inhumane. It is absolutely disgusting. I hope that you will share this with your other friends, whether you're disabled or not. This is important. I will share the articles down below if you'd prefer to share those rather than my video. Please do talk about this. Let people know about what's going on. Contact your senators in America if you can. However that process is done. Email them, phone them, let them know you think this is disgusting and unacceptable, and maybe we can do something to put a stop to this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this down in the comments. Do you think there's more that we could do than just making videos and talking about it? Do you think it's okay? Do you think it's acceptable? I would really hope you don't. Again, I expect I will have comments from right-wing folks saying they shouldn't have sought refuge if they didn't want to be treated badly. But it isn't illegal. It's perfectly legal to seek refuge. Now this video has been a bit all over the place. This stuff is very hard to talk about. I hope you understand that. Again, if there's anything I've said that you didn't quite understand or follow, it's all down in the description where I read about all this and sort of put it all together. Thank you guys very much for watching. I make a lot of videos like this. I make some sort of activist videos like this, if you will, as well as videos about my own disability and my day-to-day life. So if you want to see more of that, be sure to subscribe, like the video as well, because it'll help way more people see it. It'll push the video out to more people and maybe we can get something done about this. And be sure to check me out on my socials. I post when I'm going to make videos. I talk about the videos I've made, so you may find that of interest. Thanks so much for watching again, guys. Hope you have a great day. Bye!